Oh, good evening. Good evening. If you saw the adverts rather than just picking this up because it happens every Sunday night, saw the reminders, you'll know that this weekend has been a pretty challenging weekend. In some ways, it's been a weekend of great hope. In other ways, of great personal loss. In the early hours of this morning, actually, as she was just settling in for the night, my grandmother lay back on her pillows. And instead of resting back into the waiting eider down, she found herself resting directly in the arms of her Savior. This morning she went home to glory. And so for her, time itself is no more. Resurrection has arrived. She fell asleep with all the restrictions of her illness, her old age, and she woke in the fullness of the immortal, the incorruptible, the undefeated, undefilable life of God Himself. The things that she had celebrated and shared with others and longed for her whole life, for her right now, they're real. The Bible talks about those who wait. And so tonight, we are those who wait. Myself and my family, particularly my mum, for these last few years has had to look after her own mother through really difficult times. And God has been faithful, and our hope is unshaken, and the certainties of what we believe are ours in Jesus, they remain for us certainties. But there is an empty chair, an empty room. There'll be one fewer face for my little boy to kiss in his Zoom call later. And so I wondered what I would talk about tonight. I wondered for a moment if I would talk tonight, and then I remembered her passion to share her faith with people and the story of our hope and of our salvation and of the forgiveness of God and of the warmth of His welcome. And so here I am, because I cannot do anything else. Our whole life was devoted to sharing the love of God with people, to providing an opportunity for folk to know the same Jesus that had stepped into her life and rescued her, not as a particularly young woman. I mean, on the grand scale of things, fairly young, but and so I began to think about how that love manifested itself. And I wish I'd come up with some great theological moment, some great story of extraordinary evangelism. But instead of that, I kept coming back to what is, for me, my favorite photograph of my grandmother. It's not one of the photographs of when she traveled halfway around the world to see her new grandson in the very difficult conditions of Papua New Guinea. There's some great photos where she looks like she's just about ready to step on a red carpet at Cannes, and instead she's standing up to her shins in mud. It's not one of the pictures of us playing together when I was little, or one of the many family holiday photographs. It's not one of the photos where I'm all dressed up to the nines back in the day when I still was a little more presentable than perhaps the image you see in front of you. She would stand alongside me, and it didn't matter how well dressed I was. She sort of had a shine about it. It's none of those. But it's a photograph which I hope nobody will ever see, because she would hope that no one would ever see it, and I would be slightly in trouble for talking about it. When I was in my early teens, as part of just a school concert, nothing particularly special, but it was the first time that I played at an event that was in Glastonbury Town Hall. And so my grandparents, my grandfather was still with us at the time, were eager to come and to see their only grandchild strutting his stuff on the stage in Glastonbury. She was always dressed for events far grander than any she ever got to go to. So she went to get her hair done, and for some strange reason decided that she wasn't entirely happy with the color, so was going to color it herself. And her initial attempt, as was quite common, I'm told, I've never tried dyeing my own hair. I've sprayed it a few strange colors, but there was a chemical reaction and her hair went green. And so she went to the hairdresser to try and get it rectified, and the hairdresser said, I only really have one option here. I'm going to have to dye it very, very black to try and cover that color, and then you're going to have to grow it out. My grandmother's never had her hair dyed particularly dark, not in my lifetime anyway. And the idea of having jet black, almost wiry looking hair didn't necessarily appeal to her, but it was better than green. So she had it done, and sure enough, it came out looking almost plastic black. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with black hair, but natural black hair has a sort of beautiful shine to it. There's no luster to it or anything, and the repeated treatments made it look really as though she was wearing the world's most terrible wig. Anyway, she duly put on all her glad rags, and her and my grandfather came to see me at the concert. And I have a photograph of my grandmother looking as proud as punch of my not particularly wonderful contribution to that concert, standing in amongst a big crowd of people with hair she found truly mortifying. And the reason it's my favorite photograph is because in that moment, as much as a 12, 13-year-old boy can ever possibly grasp it, I knew just how much she loved me. It's a truly terrible, terrible haircut. Awful. I mean, I clearly don't have very high standards of appearance, but I'd have felt pretty uncomfortable looking like that. She's just beaming at me, proud as anything. Doesn't care what anybody else is going to say or think. I mean, I'm sure deep down inside she was pretty mortified, but she wasn't going to miss those moments for the world. She loved me. And as I was thinking about tonight, and I was thinking about what she would want me to tell you, thinking about that photograph and how much it means to me, I remembered what Hebrews says about how Jesus expressed his love for us. I'll read the whole passage in a moment. It's Hebrews 12, but the bit that really came to me with such force It's in verse 2 where it says that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. And at that point, you or I might say he put up with the pain and the anguish and the agony and the torture and the injustice and all of those things. But it doesn't say that. It says, despising the shame. It's an old hymn that says, bearing shame and scoffing rude in my place. Condemned he stood. Philippians says that he took on the form of a servant, though he was in very nature God. And it would not be robbery for him to be just to claim his equality with God, but he didn't grasp at it. Instead, he made himself. He made himself of no reputation. My glamorous granny. My always dressed to impress. My never a hair out of place grandmother. In that picture, she's not bothered that the people around her are wondering what on earth happened to her hair. She couldn't care less if people will tut or mumble something afterwards and say she let herself go or any of the rest of it. She is just looking at me with such complete delight. It's just a haircut. And I understood love because she couldn't have cared less about what the people around her might say. And yet, for my sake and for your sake, so that we might have access to him, so that we might have a restored relationship, so that we might be forgiven. It doesn't describe us as the goal that was set before him, or the outcome, or the challenge, or the test of his divinity, or any of that. It says for the joy that was set before him. It doesn't say for the already perfected, everything right, nothing wrong with us, never made a mistake, for the fine ones amongst us. It doesn't say that. It says for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. Man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We hid our faces from him. He endured so much and suffered so badly, was so openly put to shame. Isaiah continues that we esteemed him smitten of God and afflicted. Yet he was bruised for our transgressions. He was wounded for our iniquities, and the punishment that brought us peace fell upon him. By the bleeding stripes that were beaten into his back, we are healed. You know, you can almost see the expression on her face if she'd heard this. It would be that little wry smile that says, you know you're getting away with something here, kid. And then it would broaden out. Because if that story of her with her really bad haircut would just help to articulate something of what it is to be loved. A tiny fraction, if it would help you to understand what it means that he's so delighted in you that Jesus disregarded the shame. He couldn't even weigh it. It wasn't of any importance to him. As he went to the cross, as he endured all that he went through, his mind was fixed on you and he loved you. He loved you with an eternal, unshakable love, a love of all knowledge. You know, I'd say my grandmother's opinion of me was very much rose tinted. Every grandparent's opinion of their grandchild ought to be rose tinted. Jesus knew you. He knew everything about you. He knew you at your worst. He knew the things so awful that even you, when you think them, recoil and don't do them. He knew everything. And he still loved you. And he still considered that all that he would suffer, all the mocking, his own creations would despise him, would reject him. The humiliation and the shame of sharing his death with those who were under legitimate judgment. He thought about you, his joy in you, his love for you. And then none of the rest of it mattered. No. For those of us who will go on waiting, those in my family and the other folk that loved my grandmother who will now have to wait without her, whom there will be a permanent void, a gap left that cannot be filled, nor should be in this life. We share her confidence. We have that same peace because one day we will follow where she has gone. One day, like she did, we will lay back and rest forever in the arms of Jesus. One day, these are bodies of ours that are corrupted, that are fading, that are broken, that are decaying, will be replaced with the immortality of God. And we have that hope. We don't have that hope because our grandmother shared it with us, or because our parents did, or because we grew up in that culture. We have that hope because Jesus, who was in very nature God, loved us so much that no matter what it cost him, no matter what he had to endure, he made that hope available for every single person without limit. So the choice is theirs. Tonight, I don't know if you've experienced what it is to be loved like that. See, it's one thing that he loves you that way. It's another thing to receive it. It's one thing that he did all that for you. It's another thing to truly take possession of that freedom, of that forgiveness, of that life. I don't know how I could ever have failed to grasp how much I was loved by my grandmother. Every time I look at that slightly weird picture of her slightly strange hairdo that within a month or so had largely grown out. And if that overwhelming sense of being loved can come from an act so small, how much more do you think it is to feel the love of a God who endured the cross for you, for me, personally? Here's the full opening of Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and there's one more tonight than there was last night, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And for those of you who know him, for those of you who love him, and for those of you who've chosen him, you know, in these days, there's so many people telling us how difficult it's going to be and how hard the race might be. Well, it's not my experience yet, but maybe it is yours. But when you think about what he did for you, when you think of that amazing phrase, he despised the shame. Verse 3 is for you. For consider him. Think about him. Think about how he lived. Think about how he laid down his life. Think about the joy that you are to him. And consider if he is your joy, consider him who endured such hostility from sinful people against himself, so that you will not become weary and discouraged in your souls. So I was thinking about tonight, and part of me didn't want to sit here and be emotional because I knew I was going to be emotional, and part of me thought that I couldn't avoid it. I went ahead because I knew how my grandmother devoted her life to sharing this good news. Now, she would not want to be the reason why I took a night off. How much more when the challenges of life come, when circumstances seem against us, when speaking of love and of welcome and of forgiveness, making the bold offer of the gospel that whoever you are, we've got good news for you. Bridging social gaps and refusing to pigeonhole people or deny access to this amazing good news to people simply because of how society might identify them or how they might choose to identify themselves. There is no person ever born, ever living, or ever will be for whom Jesus did not endure the cross. And so think about him. Think about his love for you. Think about his determination. Think about how he despised the shame. And when you endure, when you have to put up with the things that seem like indignities, when you have to put up with opposition, when you feel like people aren't taking you seriously, or people want to mock the fact that you're speaking love to people that may not love you and may not want to receive it, it doesn't matter. Don't let the world make you weary. Don't let religion discourage you. Fix your gaze on him. Say, Jesus, if you love them, if you love them this much, then they are worth immeasurably more than anything I might face or go through. And I want the world to know about the love that I found. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. God bless you. I know tonight's probably been a little bit overly personal at times. Thank you for bearing with me. But above all else, know that you are loved, that it's for you, that Jesus thought the cross was a little thing to endure, so that there might be an opportunity, just a possibility, that if you choose to, you could have that relationship with him, the fullness of which my grandmother is now enjoying. God bless. God willing, we'll see you next week.